Now I would like to open the first session of the school and introduce our first speaker from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, Irantzu. Irantzu will speak about the European Commission's SSbD framework.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the nice introduction and for, of course, inviting the Joint Research Center to be present in this nice training school. How do I put my presentation? Do I need to? It's here in the folder. Okay. Can I see? Okay. Well. Okay, so yeah, my title is a bit boring. I'm going to talk about the European Commission Safe and Sustainable by Design framework. And maybe before I start, for those of you that are not familiar with the Joint Research Center, I would like to introduce ourselves and tell you that we are the Science and Knowledge Service of the European Commission, that we provide independent, evidence-based knowledge and science to support European Commission policies. We are independent of private, commercial, and national interests, and we work for more than 40 European Commission policy departments. Our headquarters are based in Brussels, but our scientific sites are in 5 member states, in Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and in Italy, where all the people that is working on the SSbD framework are located, as myself, and we are more than 2,000 employees. So, said that, I was thinking about what I could present that nobody knows already from the framework, especially because then Davide and Martin will further develop on what I am going to say. So I thought we are going in the coming days to dig in on very technical, scientific issues, and maybe I could zoom out a little bit and give you the broader context of the SSbD, something that you should bear in mind all the time when we are, focusing in the details. Don't forget the big picture, the overarching purpose of the framework. And for that, I will guide you through the history of the framework, starting from the past, where we come from, the present, where we are today, and the future, where we are going to with the framework. And let's start with the past. So I will talk a little bit about the bullet points that you have there, and starting from the Green Deal and the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. You might already know that in 2019, the Green Deal was published, the ambition of the European Commission towards zero pollution, climate neutral, and circular economy. And in order to achieve these ambitions, the Commission foresaw a lot of strategies and action plans. And among the ones tackling the zero pollution and the environmental issues, we have the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability that aims at strengthening the protection of the human health, environment, and the planet that are exposed to chemicals and materials. And for that, it foresees a lot of possibilities in order to achieve these goals. And key enabler for that is the design of safe and sustainable chemicals and materials and driving innovation for that. And that's the reason why one of the key aspects, actions of the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability is to design a framework that supports innovation towards achieving this goal. And the Joint Research Center was commissioned for that. Very briefly, what we did? Of course, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we review already existing frameworks touching upon safety, sustainability, and innovation, coming from different organizations, NGOs, member states, academia, industry, and capitalizing on that, we developed the framework. The framework talks about safety and sustainability, and that was our first focus. But then we, of course, consulted with the stakeholders, and they were missing a very important angle in the framework, that was the innovation. And that's the reason why the framework published in 2022 talks about two components, one being the innovation, the redesign, and another one, the safety and sustainability assessment that need to be considered in an integrative way and tiered way throughout the innovation. That this is the image that you have here illustrating how this is an iterative exercise throughout the entire innovation. The framework also talks about adopting it with a life cycle perspective. And that's the reason why we propose a stepwise approach for the safety and sustainability assessment following the life cycle of chemical material. Starting from, and you are very familiar with the 5 steps of the framework. Here we only see 4 because it comes from the recommendation. I will talk about it later. That doesn't talk about the 5th step. But we have the first step that talks about the intrinsic properties of the chemicals materials. Once we develop is when we start being concerned about these safety and sustainability issues due to the chemicals and materials. So we focus on identifying the intrinsic properties, the hazardous properties. Then step 2 looks at the next life cycle stage, that is basically where the workers are dealing with these chemicals and materials, how they are exposed together with the environment in the workplace scenarios, and how the risks and the sustainability issues need to be addressed. The third step talks about the next life cycle stage once we have the chemical material or the products where the chemical materials are included, and how we are exposed, the human and the environment, to these chemicals when we use the products. Not only the industrial, the workers, but also professionals and consumers, and of course the population that is exposed to these chemicals through the environment. And last but not least, once all the life cycle of the chemical material is known, is when we apply the environmental sustainability, the recommended PEF methodology with the 16 impact categories, and the social and economic sustainability assessment. And for these different steps in the framework, we identify aspects and indicators that need to be considered together with already existing methodologies and tools that can help us to assess the safety and sustainability performance. And we also propose a way of defining criteria and how to evaluate according to these criteria. Our next step was to test the applicability of the framework in real case studies. And as the framework, we focus in this exercise a lot on the safety and sustainability assessment. And that's the reason why when we publish the framework, we talk a lot about what is missing with regards to data availability, gaps, needs, methodologies, tools, overlapping between the steps, and the need of additional knowledge. And in our publication, we identify these aspects, like there is a lot of data missing when we are doing safety and sustainability assessments, that there is still a big need to integrate these 2 dimensions with innovation, that for some aspects we have a lot of methodologies and tools, but for others we need to develop more, and that there is a need to create this expertise on SSbD and building a community in this sense. Something that we never talk about is that actually half of the time that we dedicated to this project, we spent trying to define the case study. We decided to do it in an already existing chemicals materials because due to the lack of time, we couldn't start from zero in an innovation process. But still, it took a lot to define what is the case in which we are applying the framework, what are the alternatives that we are going to choose, focusing on this entire life cycle. I will talk about it, I think, in 2 slides. So after the publication of the framework, we also have the recommendation of the European Commission that was published and based on the framework after the publication of the framework, and the basis is the framework. And the recommendation is an invitation to member states, industry, academia, and research and technology organizations to apply the framework, to support it, to test it, and to provide feedback on a voluntary basis in research and innovation activities. The idea of this 2-year testing period was to collect input on the assessment, methods, and data, again focusing a lot on the assessment part, to then the GRC provide additional methodological guidance where we identified gaps and needs, also with the intention of further defining criteria, and of course with the purpose of the revision of the framework to improve its relevance, reliability, and operability in 2025, so this year. And here as well, we identified that this scoping of the implementation of the framework was missing. So it was not only us, but we saw that also from the feedback that we received, this was a key element that we needed to address. And as an outcome of the revision and the experience so far, we published the methodological guidance that, of course, addresses needs and challenges related to the safety and sustainability assessment, especially how to integrate them in the innovation when low TRL innovations, low maturity innovations, where there is a need to provide more guidance on that sense. But the key element of the methodological guidance is the scoping analysis. It is important because it guides the implementation, it contextualizes the implementation of the framework by answering questions, simple questions like why we are applying the framework, what is the problem that we want to solve, what is the cycle, the life cycle of the chemical that we are trying to address, and what is the innovation that we are going to apply in order to improve the safety and sustainability performance. What, of course, are the actors involved, because this is a life cycle exercise, so it's not a one single actor thing. All the life cycle actors need to be involved. And how are we going to prove that we have improved this performance? And it also strengthens some of the fundamentals of the framework, like it is a life cycle approach. We don't have to forget that, because for the environmental sustainability is taken for granted, not that much for the safety. That for that reason, it's a value chain effort, and that it's an holistic approach that integrates safety and sustainability from the beginning to the end of the innovation. I think that Martin will talk a bit more about it, so I will leave it there. And yeah, just to finalize the past of the framework, to mention here, I highlighted in this life cycle of the SSbD the important milestones that I just briefly introduced of the GRC. In addition to that, as you see, important has been always the feedback that we receive from stakeholders in order to improve the framework. And with each milestone, we have organized workshops in order to hear the comments of the stakeholders. We also have organized 2 editions of the SSbD bootcamp, and of course, we participate in a lot of events and projects in order to gain knowledge about what is in the reality, what are the challenges in applying the framework. Yeah, and this is a nice picture of some of the events that we have organized so far, thanking all the stakeholders for their support and their contribution. So let's now talk about the present. And what is the present? So we are also familiar by now about the new competitiveness compass, the new ambition of the European Commission that shifts a little bit in the sense that we are trying to address issues, needs with regards to the competitiveness of Europe. But a key enabler to achieve all these new goals, ambitions, and one of the 3 main pillars of the competitiveness compass remains innovation. Closing the innovation gap is an important pillar of the new European Commission policy. And this as well has been the trajectory, as you have seen, of the framework since its publication in 2022, and how we have been addressing challenges related with innovation in the context of the methodological guidance. And this is the direction that we are moving forward or towards. So strengthening innovation will be key in the new framework or the revised framework. We want to strengthen the integration of the SSbD in innovation, as we have done already in the methodological guidance with the scoping analysis. We want to strengthen as well the safety and sustainability assessment in innovation. Some hints were already given in the methodological guidance, and we try to elaborate on that in the revision of the framework. And we also consider nature of innovations, the different innovation types that we have, the different TRLs or maturity of innovation, the different goals and rules and compliance that will be needed in the future for the innovations, and trying to identify different approaches for the SSbD considering all these aspects. The revision, of course, strengthens as well the fundamentals of the framework, so that it's an holistic approach, provides a broader view on safety and sustainability aspects, and supports the identification of gaps, needs, areas for improvement, and potential future trade-offs. It's a life cycle value chain approach, so encourage the value chain engagement, and this can support early identification of important aspects to be considered along the value chain. And it's a pre-market research and innovation approach, and this facilitates or provides a safe space for a trusted environment in order to facilitate the dialogue and exchange with the stakeholders, value chain actors. In addition, because of this, it supports informed decision-making. It also supports the uptake of the entire life cycle on these decisions and contribution, win-win exercise, and also provides to be ready for regulatory compliance once these innovations are mature enough to be marketed. And it also provides the means for continuous improvement. Once the system is established, when everything is established, it's easier to improve safety and sustainability, or even functionality or other innovation aspects. It strengthens the value chain collaboration, not only for the exercise of the SSbD, but for whatever is needed in this context. Oops. And it also provides the means to be ready for future regulatory needs. Moving a bit more forward, the framework, the revised framework as well, makes an attempt to close the loop. I've tried to illustrate here a bit with the different publications that we have, how we started with the assessment performance, how this, with the feedback, with the testing of the framework, we saw that there was a need to know how we evaluate. This exercise, it was done with our case studies, and this has been as well tried with the different feedback that we have received from stakeholders. But of course the question was, okay, what do I do once we have the assessment, once I have done the evaluation, how can I conclude? For that, it was the purpose of the scoping analysis. In the scoping analysis, we decide how we are going to evaluate, and according to this, how we are going to conclude. And then, of course, how are we going to report, to record all these exercises throughout the entire innovation process. So this is a bit the exercise that we are doing as well, in order, as we said, to integrate the SSbD in the broader innovation research and activities. Last but not least, of course, the revision of the framework strengthens some of the key aspects, fundamentals of the framework, that it's innovation, voluntary to be applied approach, life cycle approach, so collaboration with stakeholders, value chain is important, that it's an approach to support innovation, redesign, not only of chemicals, materials, but also the processes in which they are involved and the products in which they end up being part. And that as it's in iterative innovation approach, the iterative and nature and tiered nature are intrinsic to the implementation of the framework, that is implemented in a transparent and trustable manner, and that it's not static but a continuous improvement. And yeah, to finalize my presentation, I hope that I am still on time. What's next? So the revision of the framework is on the way. We will have a consultation, stakeholder consultation. Once the draft is finalized, it's probably going to happen during the summer. And then the final document will be published end of October. We will have the third edition of the SSbD bootcamp in parallel with the publication of the framework, end of October. Will be a new recommendation, and it was already announced in the last stakeholder workshop. And the new recommendation and the revised framework will be presented in the 6th SSbD stakeholder workshop in December. We will provide additional methodological guidance based on the revised framework. And of course, more than that, all the projects that are implementing, supporting the framework and the outcomes that we will see in the coming 4 or 5 years. And I think that with that, I finalize my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irantzu. I would like now to introduce Dr. Davide from Fraunhofer, Italia, who will give us a bit broader policy context on safe and sustainable by design.
Okay, thank you very much. So I wanted to thank Irantzu myself and really pick up from where she left. So we are not going to reinvent the wheel, and we are looking at the bigger picture. I'm going to give you some additional policy references to help you understand how SSbD fits into the broader EU regulatory landscape. So we saw that SSbD is a voluntary regulatory framework, that it has a scoping and an assessment phase, and Irantzu already mentioned some of the overarching regulatory policy strategies, documents at European level. When we go a little bit more operatively speaking, we can leverage on some interesting corporate level pieces of legislation that can support how we define the criteria and we do the SSbD assessment. So some noteworthy examples that you might already know are the corporate sustainability reporting, the corporate sustainability due diligence that would inform the sustainability performance of the company and also regulate how the supply chain works. Others are more oriented towards the materials that a company uses, like the Critical Raw Material Act, or provisions that are more closer to directly measuring the environmental emissions of an industry, like the Industrial Emission Directive. There are a few more, like the Conflict Minerals Directive that regulates certain types of mineral that might be used in products and need to undergo the SSbD approach. Another noteworthy one that you will see again in a bit is also the Waste Framework Directive. At a company level, the Waste Framework Directive sets the picture for how a company produces, handles, and disposes of their waste. On the contrary, if we look more at the product side, since the idea of the SSbD innovation is also to go to market, many of these products will also fall under the provisions of the Right to Repair Directive. In general, as you can see at corporate level, we have many pieces of legislation. We also have several at product level. These are more connected kind of one-on-one to the 5 steps of the SSbD assessment. The first big one is the REACH regulation, and the regulation of evaluated and approved chemicals. That is not only a piece of legislation. The ECHA, the European Chemical Agency, also following this assessment procedure, created a database that contains around 150,000 chemicals and mixtures that have already been assessed for their hazardous properties. So when you start the SSbD journey, you can start by checking if the substances that you are considering are already assessed. That means not reinventing the wheels and having kind of support in how you do the assessment step of the SSbD. Same goes a little for the Chemical Labeling and Packaging Directive. The Seveso Directive could be, or the Major Chemical Accidents Directive, informs how a company handles, stores, and uses substances at their plant's premises. So it's not directly connected to how you develop a new substance or a new material, but it could support you in the assessment of the occupational health and the risk assessment during the production phase, for instance. Another piece of legislation that I will talk to you a bit more about in incoming slides is the recent regulation on eco-design for sustainable production that would support more on aspects like recyclability, reparability, the content of substance of concern in a product, and many of the products that are targeted by the ESPR are also relevant for the SSbD approach. Again, there are many other pieces of legislation that could provide some insight to be used throughout the different steps of the SSbD approach. One is the regulation of hazardous chemicals. Another one is the persistent and organic pollutants regulation. The plastic packaging waste directive, because many products need to be packed. I'm mentioning again the waste framework directive because if a corporate level, it tells a company how they have to handle their waste, at product level, it tells what kind of code and what kind of disposal or recovery strategies are assigned to that kind of waste. So since in SSbD we consider a life cycle perspective, there is also the end of life. More specifically, when we look at the ESPR, it's a regulation that has been in force since July of 2024. Its focus is on eco-design for products. It comes from the same kind of name for the directive, but it was focusing back in 2009 on energy-related products, so appliances and so on. But it retains the same principles, extending the criteria to these 11 final products and 7 intermediate products that are relevant by themselves but can contribute to producing the final ones. In April of this year, there has been an additional shortlisting for prioritization purposes, and now we have these products that need kind of immediate attention, but by 2027, 2028, every product family targeted by the regulation will be regulated specifically by a delegated act containing the criteria identified as relevant for that product family to determine all the sets of criteria that are including the provisions of the regulation. Many of those are parameters and criteria that will be assessed in the SSbD approach and would be reported according to parameters and criteria selected for doing that kind of approach. So the two frameworks are very interlinked. All these informations, and I'm talking about the digital product passport, whether they are performance-oriented or information-oriented, it depends on the product family, will be included in the digital product passport. That is a digital document, in case some of you are not familiar already with that, will contain all the relevant information for a product throughout its entire life cycle, ensuring that all relevant stakeholders in that life cycle are properly put in contact in order to either provide information and also secure the respect of intellectual property, in order to complete the picture throughout the extraction of materials, the production of the good, the usage and disposal of it. There will be a dedicated session on it on Friday late morning, so I'm really looking forward to that because there are 2 European projects that are specifically dedicated to it. So really, the key takeaways that I want you to leave from this presentation and face this incoming week of intensive training is that the European Union has many regulatory instruments, different levels. Most of them are meant to work together. So they are not there to bind you or to limit the innovation process. They are there to provide support and guidance on how you tackle the different steps. Because really, if you have to start, and Martin will tell you more in the scoping phase, one of the things that you can do is start Googling and see if what the aspect that you are focusing on has been already somehow regulated, and if there is available insight on it. That would support both the innovators with direction, criteria, and actionable standards to use in the different steps of the assessment, and also companies, providing them the tools to innovate, either at product level, at process level, and ultimately future-proofing their credibility, because we have to not forget that there is the whole topic of greenwashing and company performances to be kept in mind. So in conclusion, SSbD does not run in parallel to compliance. It can be strengthened by it, and it has the power to transform compliance into a driver for smarter design and innovation. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Martin Himley from Paris London University Salzburg. He will introduce to us the scoping part of the SSbD framework.
Good morning. Thanks a lot, Daniel, for introducing me. I will now try to drag you a little bit more into how to do that scoping. And I do this using materials that we have generated in the Planets project on the scoping and Tier 1 assessment strategies. So just as I have mentioned Planets project, this is actually a project where we innovate, savor economically, eco-friendly and socially and economic viable alternatives for chemicals. What type of chemicals are we talking about? We talk about plasticizers, surfactants, and flame retardants. I need not say much about the framework. Irantzu has beautifully introduced basically the history of the framework. We see here again this kind of time frame. We received this methodological guidance document something like a year ago. And the strategy that we have also developed for this project and that we are going to be practicing this afternoon together on other cases that were provided by different projects are somehow in line with this methodological guidance document. We know that later this year we are expecting a revised framework, and scoping analysis as how to do that will probably also be an initiative or kind of a topic there. So, scoping. In order to do SSbD, you need a plan. If this is, for example, your innovation cycle, you start at the very early phase to define what's the problem. You need to have some kind of benchmark in mind. You want to optimize this benchmark. You want to innovate a product. You need to change something in either the product itself or the process or the chemicals that are feeding into this product. Irantzu has already introduced to the relevant questions there. So the why, the what, the who, and the how. These are actually guiding us in this process. In the end, you will then identify some alternatives for your benchmark to optimize a product or a process, and you will assess this hazard-related, exposure-related endpoints. You will also look at economical viability of the product, of the social acceptance in line with the stakeholders that you identify in the scoping analysis, and then kind of implement your SSbD innovation cycle. So this is basically what you do. So in the beginning, you need to plan. You need to get an overview of what is wrong, what do I need to optimize, and actually to define many different things. Again, we have learned from Davide nicely that there is also always a regulatory kind of framework around all that. So also during the scoping phase, you investigated. I will not touch upon this. We have heard just Davide talking about this. But what are the key questions? By the way, this presentation is also provided as a PDF in the same folder that the pitch presenters can upload their the presentation, so you have access to the slides and you can investigate them in peace in the coffee break or whenever you want. So, the why. There are company policies, so there is a kind of environmental social governance always in place in any kind of company that works out there and that wants to put a product onto the market. So in alignment with your company policy, you are guiding this kind of innovation processes. The what? So you identify basically what's the problem of my product. This can be a chemical, it can be a material, a component of a product, it can be the product itself, it can be eventually the process that requires further optimization, yeah? And the how is basically then the way how you perform the assessment, which you plan in the scoping phase, and this is dependent on the problem here, this substance of concern or substance of high concern or substance of very high concern, for example. And you also look at which stakeholders are relevant here. Stakeholders, what they are. It could be the society, because in the end somebody has to pay the price if you put something on the market that pollutes our environment, for example, maybe in 5, 10 years. Somebody needs to pay the price, but this can also be your customers. Somebody needs to pay the price of the product. It can also be the upstream supply chain stakeholders, for example, the companies that provide the chemicals that I need for my product. And this you plan. All these materials from this training that we are going to be conducting this afternoon, which we conducted in our project, we co-developed with our industrial partners, are available via Zenodo to everybody, and this is basically the Zenodo entry for that. Here is the DOI for that. And it's aligned on a kind of workflow. And this workflow here in green on the top depicts what the scoping needs to be, what needs to be done during the scoping phase. So you need to get an overview of the technical value chain of your product. Yeah, you need to see who are the stakeholders, which companies are involved in the entire process. Then you kind of identify using such a table, what's my motivation, why do I need to redesign it, and you prioritize. You look into each of the different steps of the SSbD framework, which are hazard identification, exposure assessment during the work, at the workplace, during the production phase, but also during the use phase. You can eventually conduct an entire life cycle assessment. And this you basically look at these kind of steps of the framework here, and you look basically also into your value chain, or into your innovation cycle. So is this something that happens rather at the beginning, or is this in the use phase, or in the end of life scenario, for example? Where's the biggest problem? And you prioritize by giving a number of asterisks or plus signs and something like that. So basically, here you identify what needs to be done at most with the product, and then you work on guided by some questions on basically the redesign definition and the system boundary. And then this is also there is also some guiding questions there for landscaping the regulatory framework around that. This is the green thing, the scoping, yeah, trying to answer the why, the who, and the what. And then we plan SSbD, which is in blue here. Basically in relevant or kind of independence on what the technological readiness level of your product is. It could be a very early innovation, then you do this in a very crude tier 1 early assessment, for example. So this is the planning phase that here, to actually get an overview of on the how. Good. A few details, and I'm not going to go into all of these details, what I have just tried to overview. So basically, this could be a kind of a technical value chain, yeah? So this is how it should look like. Who actually, it basically depicts a series of interconnected processes and stakeholders that contribute to the creation, development, and delivery of the product. Yeah, this is just kind of the definition of a value chain basically is, yeah? And this you identify in the first step of the scoping. So this is objective 1. Objective 2 is then, and this I have shown already, identifying basically what's the need, where do I need to innovate, where I need to optimize, and there are tools out there that you can use for that, but in the beginning, in the scoping, you just kind of sit together, the innovator with maybe some SSbD expert of the company, or maybe with somebody from the quality management and some business people, they sit together and kind of make up their mind in a couple of hours, do a kind of scoping, what's the problem, and identify where they really need to start working on. Yeah, and then they basically just follow some kind of guiding questions where that help you to set up the goals for your innovation. I'm not going through the details here. You can check it out on these materials that are provided on the link or via Zenodo. Also, you look at these SSbD principles. So there are, for example, these so-called 8 SSbD principles, design principles for SSbD. We have not touched upon this, but this will guide you throughout this week, basically. So there are this question, energy efficiency, yeah? Critical raw materials, hazardous substances, whole life cycle, the holistic perspective of SSbD. So these kind of things you make up your mind about. Yeah, and then the point is, actually, it could be, as I have already alluded to, a kind of material design question. It could be a process optimization question, or it could be a product exchange or whatever question. Yeah? So you can run through these type of questions here and identify where you are going to be acting mostly. I have said system, yeah? So system boundaries, for example, was mentioned. So this is basically these different shells that are there. You can even eventually just replace a substance of concern of the product. Or you optimize a process, for example, or replace a product, or kind of just identify a different type of use for your product. Yeah? So these are basically different layers where your innovation process kind of takes place. And here are more guiding questions in order to be defining the system boundaries more specifically, not going into detail now. We have a practical work on that. You can follow that. And this is then basically also defining, again, on this technical value chain, basically your innovation action items. Yeah? So in relation to the 5 steps of the framework as it was published, we have heard the recommendation just kind of highlights these 4 steps, but still the socio-economic assessment is an interesting and important and relevant part. Maybe we will see it in the recommended, in the updated recommendation end of this year, we will see. And then you are ready basically for starting to do it, yeah? In relation on whether you have a very highly developed product already, so at the very late TRL, technological readiness level, or whether you are very early in your development process. So for example, here in this idea phase, where eventually the chemical or material is not even existing yet, so you're considering different alternatives, which one to take, which one to select to go forward with from maybe a list of 100 candidates, for example. You identify in the very first tier maybe the 30 most promising ones. Yeah? Then you conduct a kind of tier 1 assessment. You are not going to do each type of endpoint that could come to mind. You need to prioritize, you need to identify, you want to work in relation to the resources that you want to spend at this stage. You have many candidates, you don't need very exact data, but you need to select. Yeah? So you do perform tier 1. What can you do at that one? So we established a kind of Excel-based tool that will also at one day become available as a kind of on a graphical user interface, but it's basically just also guiding you by a couple of qualitative questions that, again, in such a team, innovator, quality management, business sector from a company can be doing together in a kind of group work in a couple of hours. So this should not take long because you want to come up with a quick decision. Resource efficiency has always been mentioned by the industry as a very relevant factor that could limit the implementation of SSbD. So you need to be doing this in a kind of resource efficient manner. So these guiding questions are, and this you know maybe from your refrigerator, yeah, this kind of color scheme, identify kick-out questions. So eventually there is a game stopper. Yeah? For example, if you include in your innovation process, you find an alternative where you need to invest into critical raw materials. And this you can find in the ESPR, for example. So you just look it up quickly in a couple of hours. This is basically done. And then you know, okay, this is maybe not the best way to go forward with. Yeah? Or substance of very high concern included, yeah? Or maybe coming up into a kind of as a side product, for example. So based on these kind of guiding questions, you can run through this kind of decision scheme, and the details you can look up in the Excel table, basically. And this also helps you to identify so-called points of attention, because eventually you don't want to kick out a candidate at that stage already, but you want to know, okay, here it is relevant to take a point of attention. Maybe we need to optimize something. Maybe we can, for example, exclude exposure. Then the hazard is not a big problem, if we can really make sure that this kind of side product is eliminated during the process. Yeah, so you are somehow alerted on these kind of problems here, and these kind of alerts you can basically then work on in the further procedure. Run through these kind of questions. You can do this also not just for industrial project, you can do this also for your PhD thesis project if you're working on a new material, and this will instruct you eventually on all the different dimensions that I have mentioned: safety, sustainability, economic viability, also this is very relevant of course, and social acceptance in a way. And in the end, you come up, if you have a benchmark here, for example, and this is basically the full list, it kind of gives you a kind of a heat map, where you run through basically these kind of steps of the SSbD framework, and it gives you maybe some red flags in some of your alternatives, and then some other ones are maybe better one, and in the end there is a kind of summary report that could be even saying that, okay, this product is maybe not really very good, or it's containing some critical raw materials, or maybe this is a good way forward with, yeah? So it basically helps you to identify maybe from a list of 15 different candidate alternatives, the one that is most likely to be the most successful one. Good, so much for scoping in Tier 1, how to do as one possibility. There are other projects, of course, that do it in a slightly different way. Anyway, most of them are oriented on the methodological guidance document from past year, so they are in the end quite similar, raising similar questions that are basically based on the regulatory frameworks around that. This is going to be then practiced today in the afternoon on 3 different cases that we have, and with this I would like to also close here. At this stage we will come back to these 2 slides in the afternoon.